What's up, everyone? This is the Make a Difference podcast, where we spend a few minutes of our time highlighting individuals who are out there in the world in big and small ways, making a difference. I'm Darius with my co-host Farra, and today we have the pleasure of being with Kyle, one half of the founding team of the Kibera Penda Project, which they're in a very small and intentional way. They are fighting to help break cycles of generational poverty in Kibera, which is, one of the largest slums on the entire continent of Africa. So, Kyle, thank you for being with us today.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, what you guys are doing, learning about it and reading about it, we can go a number of ways with this, but for the listener, tell us a bit about the Kibera Penda Project, how you actually came to this being your calling for you and your wife, and being a calling for you and your wife, and then tell us about Kibera.
Of course, yeah, I'll kind of share the backstory first. It's kind of a different way of getting to this place in that I kind of always felt like Kenya, East Africa was part of my identity. And those who can't see any video, I definitely don't have any African roots genetically within me, unfortunately. But
South African.
Yeah, maybe South African. So my parents' close friends moved to Tanzania in like 1988. And we ended up going as a family on a trip to East Africa in 1992. So I was 8 years old at the time. And this would have been at a time, early 90s, like especially where I'm from Pasadena, Texas, which is a small little suburb, very, very, very middle class in Houston. And like nobody that I knew or anybody's family had ever even flown overseas, yet alone go to Africa. Mm-hmm. So it was a big deal in going, and became a bigger deal as we were landing in Nairobi, Kenya. We were going to drive to where they were living in Tanzania, and it was like a 12-hour drive. We ended up having 7 flat tires on that drive, and our final flat tire we broke down in the middle of the jungle. This was like dirt road, no electricity, no lights. That next morning when I had woken up from sleeping in the van, I had like 300 mosquito bites on my body.
How old were you?
I was 8. Which the trip was amazing. Like, even as a kid, I don't remember everything, but I remember big parts and pieces of it. Getting to go on safari and just meeting the people and experiencing a different culture at that age had a big effect. But when I got home, like the day after we got back, I found out that I had malaria. Mm-hmm. And being in, Pasadena, Texas, no offense, but like not the best healthcare environment down there. And this was been 90s when there is no ability to go on the internet or quickly figure out. So people were like, malaria, like we don't even know what this is. We read about it in like textbooks in med school and in college. And so long story short, they ended up overdosing me on quinine, which is like an old colonial aged medical treatment. And I almost died. And so that part, it was always, and I don't remember any of the bad stuff. My parents, it was hell for my parents, and I can't imagine going through that now having kids. But they ended up at the end like pulling me out of the hospital because they were so frustrated. And we had CPS like outside our house, like waiting for the call to take me away. And it was a big deal in the community. Yeah. And that trip, and probably even more so, actually getting sick when I got home, had always kind of been part of my identity in a weird way. Like I just had this connection to East Africa, Kenya and Tanzania specifically. And and then The Lion King comes out, and a lot of like, there was this movie called The Air Up There, which was a basketball movie about a dude from I think West Africa, and I was just obsessed. Like that was part of my story always, and to the point I would go over to like a girl's house in high school, to meet the family, and the first thing she would say is like, "Hey, tell them your story about Africa and almost dying." And so I was kind of that kid growing up who had that kind of part of the story. So, fast forward, I had a chance to go back in college and intern with an organization in Nairobi, Kenya, who worked in a slum, worked with the youth there, just different programs to kind of help the youth get out of that situation. And so that kind of continued the passion. Started dating my wife, who had similar passions, and this would have been, late 2000s, when there was kind of the big humanitarian explosion, like the Tom Shoes and the Invisible Children. And so we had a group of friends who were just passionate about doing something. And I had done quite a few of short-term kind of mission trips, humanitarian trips. And I had read a few books and just felt like very passionate about doing something long-term if I was going to go back to Africa specifically. And that, we didn't even know Kenya would be the spot, but kind of felt that tug to do something. And I felt a big tug to want to do something long-term and not just go take a trip and call it a day. And so we ended up kind of randomly touching base with a school, a primary school, which would be kindergarten through 8th grade, in this slum in Nairobi, Kenya, called Kibera. And I actually remembered one time I was over there in college on that internship trip, and I remember finding a National Geographic over there. I think I was actually in a bathroom, like on a toilet, like reading this National Geographic, and they had this huge kind of cover spread, open up all the pages of Kibera slum. I remember like, how had I not heard of this place, and reading about it. And, it's one of the biggest slums in all of Africa. It's got, easily over 1 million people in population, and they estimate the size of the slum to be about 1 square mile. So you're talking about like Central Park in New York is 1 square mile. So you've got 1 million people in that small space with zero utilities and zero, just government sponsored assistance to help them live. I mean, really, the way it was even created was it was a squatter camp for soldiers back in the colonial war days of like 1950s and 60s, and it just like exploded into this huge community. And so I remember reading that and feeling impacted. And then it was like a few years later, randomly, we kind of crossed paths with a school there who was really struggling. They were a slum school and they were getting fees wherever they could, but ultimately, they were really just letting kids hopefully get some chance at an education. And they had a British nonprofit who was kind of sponsoring their lunch every day, their lunch program. And that it was Oxfam, and Oxfam had just pulled out. And that's kind of how we came across this guy, as he was kind of struggling for some sort of partnership because they no longer had food to feed the kids during the school days. And so that's kind of coincided with the time of me and my wife. And actually we ended up having 7 other friends, one of which my sister, who were all like, maybe this is the spot. Like, we want to go do something. This could be the place. And so we went over summer of 2008, stayed in Nairobi, Kenya, kind of walked over to the slum, about an hour's walk every day, and just really had no agenda. We knew we were going to meet with the headmaster of the school, and we were going to kind of be there and meet the kids and kind of see potentially what the needs were. I think our big thing was we wanted to go in not with an idea of here's how you fix the biggest slum on the continent, or here's how you even fix poverty in general, but go in with like an open ears and open heart, and just what are the needs, what is kind of speaking to us, and how could we respond, being just privileged and blessed as we were coming from our situations back home. So with that, it was pretty evident after a few weeks of being there, we got really close with their 8th grade class, and spent a lot of time with those boys and girls. And a lot of them, I think half the class was like 15 or 16 years old, which we thought, this is kind of strange. Like, they should be high school sophomores, juniors at this age. Like, what's going on? And digging a little bit further, we had realized that they were repeating 8th grade. And digging even further than that, we realized it wasn't because they weren't smart or not gifted. It was because they just lacked the funds to be able to go on to high school. And so in Kenya, with their education system, you basically have to pay for school at every level. And it's pretty small at the elementary, junior high ages. But as you get into high school, the school fees go up, and they're not crazy, but for somebody living, in one of the world's largest slums and their family is surviving on $1 a day, anything is too much. And so these kids were bright kids and had a lot of potential, They just were unable to get out of the cycle of poverty that they had landed in. And, the headmaster at the school was just gracious and cared enough to let them keep repeating 8th grade, even though they had the scores to move on, just hoping something would happen for them. And so that really kind of impacted us and was kind of the thing that kept ringing in our ears. We were there for about 6 weeks, but when we left and came home, it was kind of like that's it. That's the thing. And our last day there, I remember we were leaving and we told that 8th grade class, like, you guys make the scores this year, we'll figure out a way to send you on to high school. And this wasn't the thought of like, this is going to be our thing and this is going to be the project or the, the organization we move forward with. We were just like, hey, we got 9 of us here. We'll cover your school fees if you guys make it. And I think that first class we had about 7, which was a little bit less than we had originally thought, but like 7 kids passed and made the grades to go on to a legit high school. And so we covered them. And then we started getting emails that next year back home from the 7th graders who were now in 8th grade. And they were like, hey, are you guys going to do this for us too? And I think by that time they had like gotten Facebook. The kids were like kind of learning about, so we're getting like hit up on Facebook from these old students that we had met for those couple of months in Kenya. And so that's kind of what we thought, like, oh, okay, wow, we didn't really think about the next class, but we obviously feel like we should do this too. And that's kind of how Kibera Penda Project was kind of birthed out. Penda is the Swahili word for love. And so we just kind of felt like we didn't know exactly what we were going to do, but we had a love for these kids and had a love for the community and, wanted to give them a chance to break out of that cycle of poverty in their lives. And from what we'd observed, we felt like education was the best way.
For sure.
And it's overwhelming being there because you see that amount of poverty and you don't just see it, like you smell it. You get off the little taxi or you get off the public transportation. I mean, the smells even hit you and it's tough to get in and you see the kids run around, not in school, no clothes on, and you see the open sewage and just the lack of basic needs is very overwhelming. And then you see it, exponentially out to 1 million people. And it's like, how do you do that? How do you start? The government of Kenya hasn't figured it out, obviously. The US and different organizations have poured hundreds of millions of dollars even into that specific slum without much of a result. And so our kind of, what kept pushing on us was the idea that it's got to be small scale. It's got to be one person. Like if we change the life of one person, then that's how it starts, because that person is going to change the life for his future family. And so these kids are in this cycle because their parents were in the cycle, and their parents were in the cycle because their grandparents were in the cycle. And it's like, it kept being like that point where you drop out of school after 8th grade and you run around the wrong people, and now you're just struggling, trying to survive. And all of a sudden now you've got kids at the age of 18, 19, and like, you're stuck. Like, what do you do then?
You got to break the cycle.
Yeah, we felt like education was how you do it.
That was my question.
And so the idea was like a one-to-one sponsorship, which back then like was pretty kind of newish. I wouldn't say it's played out because it's an important, opportunity and it does great things. But we've stuck with just like one person, either back here or anywhere around the world, sponsoring the education of one student there. And we've got 150 kids currently in high school or hoping to start back in high school. The pandemic is also having an effect there, and they've been shut down since March. And then through that, we were never thought big picture. We were always thinking, get the next class in school and kind of put out fires and make sure we have those kids covered. We never really thought down the road of like, okay, after high school, well, there is college, and then there could even be grad school, and there could be job trainings and internships. And so that's been our focus the last few years, is really figuring out that college piece. We've got about 100 kids in college now, and are finally seeing now, after 10 years, we're finally seeing our first kids who have gone through all the way through high school, 4-year, bachelor's degrees, and have gotten jobs. And that's been really cool to kind of see finally the end of the road-ish, to where now, and there's still a lot of problems. College graduates have a tough tough time getting a job in Nairobi. I mean, unemployment's sky high there. And so it's definitely not, the job's not done, but we're starting to see the impact of, this kind of investing in this education, and then seeing how it breaks the cycle of poverty for these kids and their future families.
So I have a couple of questions, man.
Yeah.
So even just, so one, what are some of the challenges? So is it strictly just a matter of financial stability and education, or, what are these students dealing with beside that might be, barriers to them actually progressing through,
Of course. Yeah, I think financial is what we always thought was the only issue. These kids are smart. Like, we get them the school fees, it's going to be fine. And then we realized, like, we initially had them go into a day school. So just like you would here in the States, like, it's about a 20-minute walk. But we were realizing a lot of them were unable to do their homework at night, whether it was because of the conditions in their house in the slum, like electricity. But like, especially our girls really, really struggled. A lot of the girls were at 14, 15 expected to take care of the house or younger siblings while their parents were out trying to make money. And it's just like, you got a lot of the other young men who don't have anything going on, who are trying to find a wife or trying to find whatever they could for that week. And like, the girls were just constantly having outside pressures. We had a lot of girls like get pregnant out of nowhere, who most of them we ended up being able to help find childcare and get them back in school. But it was, for everybody, there's a slew of other problems, even when you have your school fees paid for, the girls especially. So that led us to really kind of rethink what's the best, how do we put them in the best situation to succeed? And we ended up, a few years into the program, offering a boarding option. And we kind of had to say, hey, you gotta prove that you can handle this boarding school. They're a little bit more academic in nature. There's a little bit harder to get into, and they have higher expectations. And so you got to prove it with your scores and then prove it with your performance. But if you can do that, like, we will send you to boarding school. And so now, where we're at a few years later, we have all of our kids are in boarding school now. And so they're able to get pulled out of the slum. Most of the schools that we go to are, an hour or two outside of Nairobi. And so it's a little bit calmer, a little bit quieter. And they basically live there for 9 months out of the year. They come home for a month at a time during holidays. But we've seen a big change once that boarding option was put in. So they have that time and that place. Yeah, they have an environment to succeed. And the slum is just not an environment to succeed.
Yeah.
Right.
So now, in terms of the actual kids, thinking about it each scholastic year, how many children are we talking about you guys dealing with or helping?
Yeah.
What about
So we, it's like, you could go as, how do you scale it? And how do you also, like, not let everybody in, like, it's like you want to help everybody, but you can't. And so we had decided this primary school that we partnered with, we would accept kids only out of that school. And, it was a slum school, so they're trying to get as many kids as they can in. I mean, there was one year, the 8th grade class was like 100. And we were like, oh, wow, we can't have 100 kids. Like, how are we going to be able to find sponsors for that? But like, what you see there is, it's almost like the more kids they have, the poorer performance, because they're trying to put all these kids into a small room. And then you got, one teacher to 50 kids or something. And so part of what we've been doing with this project is also investing in the primary school, trying to get their performance up, trying to kind of change the expectations there. And what we've seen is a much better performance overall. So we've got about, I think, 50 kids a class in the 8th grade most years, and we end up having about 40 to 45 who qualify for boarding school out of that class. And so it's a high percentage, which has been really cool. And then out of those 40, 45 that we have in high school, we typically have about 30 to 35 who want to go on after high school and continue on their education. And we've got some other guys and girls who end up doing vocational training, and just they couldn't make the marks to really get into a 4-year college, but we figured out other ways to hopefully get them some training to be able to find a job.
Yeah. So now the fundraising piece, are you fundraising for every student every year, or are you able to pay in advance?
Yeah, the fundraising hope is that you find, a sponsor to cover their scholarship for the first year. And we try to have the kids, write letters. The last time I was there, I actually got like a video update on my iPhone from each student to their sponsor. And so we hope like there's a connection relationship made.
So it's like a
that will
one-on-one
then lead
walkthrough.
next year when I'm like, hey, your kid did great. He's a sophomore now. You want to cover him again? That people will be willing to do that.
Okay.
So this is so cool. And I agree that the one-on-one approach, that is absolutely how you make a connection, how you connect people to what they're giving to. I'm a very philanthropic person. I'm very involved in a lot of nonprofits. I donate a lot of money, but I have never donated to something where it's that connected. And I feel like that's amazing. I would love to actually be able to witness what my dollars are doing, like that intensely. So how much does it cost to sponsor a student for a year?
So their cost for the year is, and this is like books, uniforms, they get fed 3 meals a day. They're getting obviously full board. The high school is $600 a year, so it comes out to about $50 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So we have sponsors who some will pay for the year initially, some will sign up for recurring payments, so that's $50 a month. And the cool thing that we've seen, and that's not across the board, it's probably a couple kids each year, but they'll get to either know a sponsor for most of your years in high school, and then that sponsor from the States will end up coming on a trip with us and they get to meet. Or a lot of times we'll have people come on trips, meet a kid as he's an 8th grader, and then be like, I want to help that kid go to high school.
Cool.
And even into college. We have people that I know back here who consider the kid that they sponsored like one of their kids, and stay in touch like almost daily. One of my good friends, like his kid hits him up on WhatsApp like every other day.
That's amazing.
But it is tough because where they're at, they don't have internet out in their boarding school. They don't have internet access, and so it's not like a daily thing. And we have about 3 updates that we send out each year, and it's usually either a letter or a video. And so that connection is cool. It's puts a lot more work, from our side of trying to keep that connection, that relationship going. But I do think it's been very beneficial in the long run. And, one thing that I think sets our organization apart from others is that it's all volunteer basis as far as the admin goes. And like, I've felt very passionate about that. As someone who likes to give, I struggle with giving and not knowing how much of that dollar is going to the actual project or the kid.
Sure.
So we're big on that. It is 100%, like you donate $600, every single dime goes to that student's education. There is nothing else paid for administratively. My wife and I have been doing it for 10 years, all volunteer on the side, which, that's important to us. Does also create, like, we are just kind of doing it on the side with a family and jobs and whatnot. And it makes it tough to sometimes probably devote the needed time to the project, but we feel strongly enough that is kind of who we are and what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And when you talk about one of the kids graduating from high school, I'm assuming there's some sort of testing that's done similar to here that determines if they can get into a 4-year.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. I think it's interesting. It's their educational system, like they teach to a test. That is all you are doing. So imagine if in the US, if the only thing that decided whether or not you could go to college was your SAT score.
Mm-hmm.
And so they spend like freshman year working towards this one test that you take as a senior, and that decides your future. And the same, unfortunately, in primary school. You're working your whole primary school all the way to 8th grade towards one test in 8th grade that decides if you can go to high school or not.
So yeah, that's, I mean, you hear, it's interesting because you hear, at least and I know that this maybe isn't the same everywhere, but I feel like I hear a lot within the education space from friends that I know that are teachers or even parents. I don't have kids myself, but you hear a lot like, oh, I'm just teaching for these tests, and these tests determine if my school's going to get funding or if this kid, and it's interesting to hear that here, because we a lot of times think that in the US we're teaching for these tests. We're teaching these kids how to take a test. We're teaching these kids how to take the SAT so that they pass or they get a good score and they can get into the college of their dreams, whatever. But now hearing that you say that literally that's all they're teaching these kids, it's just an interesting perspective, because we think that's what's happening here, but
it's tough. Like, I get it. Like, I was in education for 10 years at a private high school here in Austin, and like their whole thing was, we do not teach to a test, like love of learning, that kind of thing, which was cool to see that other side. But in a large scale basis, education, like how do you gauge, how do you compare everybody together without having something that, you know, puts them all on equal playing field? And I don't know how you do it. I don't know the answer. I know it's tough. Like, you look at it and you're like, this isn't the answer, what they're doing in Kenya. But you know, at the same time, they've got a whole other host of factors to weigh in, and they're trying to figure it out. And
so if one of the kids, after they graduate from high school, they come back to you and they say, I want to go to college, can you support me? Is that something that your organization also helps to support them with? Is it the same type of thing where it's a one-on-one sponsor, where somebody is sponsoring this kid to go to college?
Yeah, so right now we've kind of ended the one-on-one after high school. Main reason being, and I probably failed to mention this earlier, but we stay connected to all our high school kids. We have a volunteer on the ground who kind of helps stay in touch, and we get every one of their grade reports. We have like academic probation. We make sure that they have attendance. Like, even during the holidays, we force them back in the slum to go to study hall that we put on, to like make sure, because they've never had that in their life. Unfortunately, most of their parents are just so busy trying to just eke out a living, or they're not even living with their parents. Their parents kind of sent them from some rural area to the capital to hopefully try to make a life. And so we want to make sure we have that accountability for them. It becomes difficult in college because we don't want to put any sort of box around what they can do or what they want to do. And so we let them kind of go off and choose the program. We give them some guidance, but if they've got something they want to follow and a passion they want to pursue, like, we want to support that. It would be tough for us to keep as tight of a leash on that as we did in high school. So all that to say, like, we kind of decided, all right, we'll let the college kids kind of go off on their own, and we'll still provide scholarships, but it's all on them to report back to us. They've got to send us, you know, their transcripts and tuition payments and what's due. And but through that, we had an organization in Austin who had worked really closely with college scholarships for like kids out of homelessness, and they had actually wanted to do something outside of Austin, worldwide, and had covered our tuition for a few years, which was great.
Wow.
Had to kind of rethink where their money was going recently, and have recently backed out. But we were able to just get another grant from another kind of education fund who is helping to cover most of our college costs right now. So that's been huge.
Very cool.
And it's been cool to kind of see, you know, these kids, I don't know, get to dream a little bit and get to kind of go after some passions. And then we've been trying to create some opportunities as well. The kind of the parent organization that we kind of partner with and fall under, we have recently built a like boutique hotel in Nairobi, Kenya. And a lot of that, there's a lot of groups that go over, kind of teams and on trips, and we were spending a lot of money on housing for those groups over there, and kind of thought this is kind of silly, and decided, well, what if we kind of built a business to hopefully fund some of these projects, and at the same time maybe even provide jobs. And so the hotel is awesome. It opened up a few years ago. It was like #1 on TripAdvisor within like 6 months. It was really cool. It is not going great right now because there's nobody traveling to Kenya and staying in hotels currently. But we've had, let me think, we have 5, 6 of our kids who were in that first class that we kind of met and fell in love with, who are now working at the hotel.
Very cool.
So that's been really cool. They've got full-time jobs, and they've also done some, vocational training or college for tourism and hospitality and hotel management. So it's been cool to see kind of the effects finally. It took a while, 8 years or 9 years to first see that first kids get through, but I think we're excited to see them, and then hopefully, the next few decades we see their family in a future family in a much different scenario and a much different spot than they were when we met those kids 10 years ago. And
absolutely,
that's kind of the dream. And I think down the road, really more than anything, I think my dream is that, Kibera Penda Project and this sponsorship program is not an American sponsoring a Kenyan kid. It's a Kenyan adult sponsoring a Kenyan kid. And I would love for that to be the result of this, is that as our kids start getting older and getting jobs, if they're like, well, I want to sponsor a kid, like someone changed my life for providing that for me, I want to do that for them. And hopefully that snowballs and we can step out and kind of turn it over, to the people of Kibera and let that be kind of their community thing and not be ours. So that'll be a long-term goal. We'll see how feasible that is, but that is kind of the dream for it.
It's an awesome dream.
Thanks.
I have just a question out of curiosity. So we have Kibera, which is in Nairobi, which is on the continent of Africa. Being the large continent that it is, can you just share from your perspective what's the relationships like outside of Kibera? How come no one's necessarily maybe doing the same thing you're doing within that space, right? So how, if you want to see a time period in which, Kiberans, I don't know if that's what they're called, but if they're caring for their own, which would likely be an extension of others on the continent. So do you see anything there, or is literally Kibera just being left alone?
It's tough. I think in some ways you see a lot happening. Like if you walk through Kibera, you see not just international organizations there trying to make an impact. You see like grassroots organizations at work. At the same time, things like Kibera Slum are such a bad spot on the government's scorecard. Like they know how bad this looks to people, not just on the outside, on the inside. They realize like there's 1 million people here who don't have basic needs met. Like that is, I think they take it on them. Like this is a bad reflection on us. At the same time, it's like, these economies, and then this isn't just in Kenya, this is probably most countries on the continent, like, they've been nationalized for 50, 60 years. They were taken over by colonial powers at the turn of the century, and in a lot of ways, like their resources and their opportunities were stolen from them from European powers. And so you're talking like Kenya was like 1963, they broke free from the British. And like in 1962, the largest landowner in Kenya was Queen Elizabeth. Like it's difficult to, in just, now we're talking like 2 generations, for that to really flip and to be able to even be able to take care of your own. And it's tough. Like I wish I had like an answer for how you get out of this in the future. Right now, like Kenya's top domestic product is tourism, and that's the case for a lot of these countries. And it's like, man, you're still dependent on other people. Like you can't, and it's a beautiful country and it's got so much potential, but they're just so behind, I think, industrial wise, because it wasn't theirs for so long. And there's been plans. And this is probably a good study in poverty in general. The government had decided, all right, we don't want to slum anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to use government funds, and we are going to build like nice middle-class apartments, basically surrounding areas of the slum. We are going to move people out. We are going to basically give them this 2-bedroom apartment, electricity, sewage, everything covered. And we're going to start bulldozing where we move them out to kind of get rid of these, slum houses. And so they do that. And like a few months later, they're coming and checking in. They're noticing like there's all these vehicles now surrounding this new apartment. They're like, these people usually didn't have cars before. Like they got jobs now and they'll be able to afford cars. And so they start to dig in a little bit more and find out that the people from the slum that they had moved out into these apartments, they had sublet those apartments for a pretty big profit to other people who were looking for housing, and they had moved back into the slum and were, they were saving money, making money by renting out a slum house, while they also were a landlord of this given apartment to them. And
right.
So it's like, when I first heard that, I was like, oh, it's cool. Like, this seems like a good idea. Maybe this will work. And then it blows up. And then it's like, it's deeper than that. It can't just be, it's not just housing. Like, that's not the issue here. It's really like a lot of the people in Kibera are like transient. Like they didn't grow up necessarily in Kibera. They come from all over the country, and their families come to the capital hoping to find a job. Or maybe they grew up in on a farm, or they had an agrarian type lifestyle a generation before, and now that doesn't work anymore in our modern world. And so they're moving to the city. I'll go get a job. They get there, can't find a job. Now it's 2 weeks later, out of money. What do I do? Well, the cheapest place to hopefully survive is the slum. And now you're there, and then you got kids, and it's just like you kind of get sucked into that situation pretty quick. And so for me, it's like you got to create jobs and create opportunities for really all Kenyans, but especially the next generation to have a chance to make something for their lives. And then the slum doesn't have to be the only option. And I know the government's trying to do that. And there is plenty of organizations who are also attempting to do that, not just in Kenya or Kibera, but, all around the continent. I think it can work, and I think it's going to unfortunately be a long process, but, I'm excited to see. And even in the 10 years that we've been going to Kenya, a lot has changed. Like, it definitely is, it's a different place than it was 10 years ago. And you see, just technological advancement, and you see industrialization, and you see a lot of things happening there. And I think my hope is just like maybe some of these countries on the continent of Africa, they're just behind a few generations because of colonialism. And maybe it's going to take a few more generations for, these countries to hopefully be not just self-sustaining themselves, but be able to sustain their people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah. Obviously you guys are a step in that process. I understand that there's a lot that goes into fixing some of these very systemic issues, but you guys are also obviously doing incredible things. And I'm in agreement that education is a really, really good starting point, because when you educate people, you empower them to do things with their lives and to further move on with their lives. So I think it's wonderful. Kyle, to wrap things up here, tell us where we can find more information, how we follow you, if someone's interested in donating or sponsoring one of these kiddos, where do they go?
Yeah, we've got a website. It's www.Kibera Penda Project. So it's Kibera, it's Kibera, and Penda, Penda. So we have a website that tells you everything about our organization. It's got an opportunity to sponsor a kid on there or even donate. And then we've got Instagram page. So if you search Kibera Penda Project, and we send quite a few updates there, as well as a Facebook group page as well, where you can kind of get more information and updates. So
great. I know Darius has one more question before we let you go.
Yeah. So, I said at the start of the episode, we do this because we want to connect. We want to hear stories. We want to give platforms to individuals like yourself, you and your wife, who are trying to not waste the time that they have on this earth. Right. And so the last thing I wanted to ask you, and you may not be able to answer it, but imagine you have a megaphone, you're talking to 10 million people, right? And particularly maybe in our country, let's just say our country, the people on the other side of this camera. I don't know. Do you have a message for them at all, man? You're someone who's digging deep in the trenches in a real way, in a place that we got it good. Like we got it good. I can't front on that. And so I'm just want to know, your perspective, what would you say, because we have issues here, we do, but just in general, maybe you have a different perspective to Lynn.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing right now is, I think when you start putting other people first before yourself, and that can be in any capacity, in your family, in your relationships, in your workplace. I think by doing that, you start to realize that becomes kind of contagious. And I think especially, when talking about like in our world right now, in America 2020, like putting somebody else above yourself could probably change the world. And it's like a very small thing, and do it once a day, and you do it to the person at a coffee shop, or you do it to a coworker, and like that ends up being, people want to reciprocate that. And then, I think it's probably the same mindset of like Kibera Penda Project, like one student, one time, like one positive moment of putting others before yourself could have a long-lasting impact. I think that's something that's been on my mind. And something else, like I get some questions from people a lot about, why are you in Kenya? Like, you live in Austin, Texas. There's so many problems here. Why are you focused over there? It's a longer story to tell them why, but it's because that place is like in my heart, part of my identity. It's part of my passion. I think we all have that place. Like your Kibera may be, here, Austin, our backyard, or it may be somewhere else here in the nation, or it could be a different issue with, maybe with homeless or something with animals. And like, we all have that. There's something that through our life experiences and through our stories, something has been placed on our heart that we feel passionate about and want to see a change in. And so go after it, like be the change. Like if you feel passionate about something, go for it, put your heart into it. I think the need is there, obviously, but I think the effect, you end up getting more out of it than the people that you're trying to help, or the organization you're trying to help, or the thing that you're trying to save. And so I know everybody, like, it doesn't matter if you traveled before, it doesn't matter, you have something that you're passionate about, that there's some sort of cause that's deep inside you. And so be about it. And I think if you're about it, you're going to see the fulfillment from that in your own life.
Come on. Roger that.
Yeah.
All right. Farrah, take us home.
Thank you again, Kyle. We really appreciate it. And what a way to wrap up. I love, I don't know, this is going to sound so silly because I don't know who said this, but I know it's someone very prominent. I'm also having a day today. But who said, be the change you wish to see in the world?
Oh, shoot. I don't know that either.
Okay, I'm glad it's not just me.
The internet.
I know it. What?
Who is it?
I just said the internet said it.
The internet.
Okay, let's just go with that. The internet told me, be the change you wish to see in the world. And I just think, you mentioned that a few times, is just be the change. And it does. It starts with one person, one
quick
idea.
Google, it was Mahatma Gandhi.
Okay.
There we go.
I take that back. It wasn't the internet. It was Gandhi.
then the next page says Gandhi didn't say that. So who, of course, I shouldn't have given that.
Well, it was a living being who likely lived it out.
And the message remains clear, is that it takes one person, one idea, one small act of kindness to change the trajectory of somebody's life.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where we will leave it today. So Kyle, thank you so much to everybody listening. Thank you for being here. And we'll be back next week with episode 7.
Later.
Awesome. Thank you.